Welcome. Welcome to Kosta Browne. I'm Paige Dana. I'm the estate director here. This is Julien, Howsepian, our winemaker. And we're super excited to spend some time with you, drinking wine, chit-chatting, generally enjoying ourselves. As you can see, there's some barrels. We are at the winery in real time. And if you don't know, the Appellation release is live right now. So you have through Wednesday to make your selections for this release. And they're really, really beautiful wines. We'll talk about the 2023 vintage a little bit, but we also thought it would be fun to dive into the cellar. So if you do want to taste along with us today, the wines that were also opened that you might have are our 2021 Russian River Valley Pinot, our 2021 Sonoma Coast Pinot, and our 2015 Sonoma Coast Pinot. So we're going to do a little side-by-side comparison, talk about how Pinot ages. I don't know about you, Julien. A question I get a lot is when should I open this bottle? So there is the opportunity to ask us questions. So we're going to keep an eye on that Q&A box. And, so we would love to have you participate and let us know what's on your mind.
Yes. Yeah, please do. We'd love to see questions coming in. Help us, keep the discussion lively and fun. And yeah, we got plenty of stories that we can dive into depending on vintage and things that have happened at the winery. So please do participate.
Great. So yeah, while we're talking today, we'll talk about how wine ages, and then we also, I want to know what you love about wine, Julien, and why we're opening bottles and when we're opening bottles. And I open these bottles on a Tuesday because why not? But having some fun and why wine brings us together. We actually do drink the wine that we make, so
Too much, probably.
probably a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. So we do have our 116 Chardonnay. This is going to be 2023 vintage. So if you are following along at home, you won't have this vintage yet. But 2023 was a pretty crazy year for us in that the weather was pretty unexpected.
Yeah, it was a strange year, 2023 was a very cool, very long growing season. And it was foggy, it was cloudy, and it just kept on being cool. And it never really got warm. I mean, we literally were robbed of the summer in 2023. And we had everything was kind of late and slow, and we had even a little bit of rain. Overall, odd year. But the wines turned out very, very good, and we'll slowly get into all of that. But I do remember, it was a game of patience. It was a game of waiting, kind of like the hurry up and wait kind of situation where you know, harvest, there's always a lot of anticipation. There's a ton of preparation. Everything is, in place, ready to go. And then you kind of just have to wait for the grapes to do their thing. And in 2023, we didn't pick our first Pinot until September. I think it was like the 19th of September.
Ooh.
And usually, by Labor Day, that's when we're really, going strong. And many times we're picking our first blocks at the end of August, especially in the last, 5, 6, 7 years or so. So September 19th was very, very late. The latest by far that I've been a part of at Kosta Browne, and I've been working here since 2012. And yeah, so it was unusual, but and then we had a little bit of heat at the end, middle of October, and that was what really finally pushed everything like into the zone. And then there was a little bit of a furious, dash to kind of get everything in, and the team had handled it really well.
Didn't we do some of our longest days, like our largest tonnage in 23, because we had so much coming in so late?
Yeah. Well, every year we always try to, see if we can knock off the record of how many tons in a day.
Yeah.
So we always kind of go for that a little bit. But yeah, no, we had some big days at the end of October, and something else that made it a little bit interesting is that the early appellations were like further delayed than the later appellations. So there was a little bit of a compression at the back of the harvest too. So, typically things kind of flow pretty smoothly. Russian River comes in first, Santa Rita gets started, San Lucia, and then Anderson Valley, Willamette Valley, all these different regions kind of have an order. So the Russian River, the San Lucia, the Santa Rita were all kind of pushed out. And then the Sonoma Coast and the Anderson Valley were delayed, but not as much as those other three. And so therefore the back end was pretty congested. So, it's just another year. It's always something. And that was what we dealt with in 2023.
It made the Halloween party extra fun because it was a real celebration of harvest being over. So
absolutely. Yeah. So, I was thinking to myself, I do remember thinking, that, well, I was trying to think of what was the last time we had a season like this, and it was actually in 2011 was the last time that we had such a cool vintage. And in fact, I think 23 was cooler than 2011. And I remember some of the challenges that we had in 2011. I wasn't at Kosta Browne that year, but I was in Napa, and very different vintages in a sense. But I do remember that there was a lot of damaged fruit in 2011 because it was wetter. It was more wet, and so there was a lot more botrytis and other mildew. And to be honest, leading up to the harvest, I was expecting that. I was like, okay, so this is what we dealt with in 2011. How do we stay ahead of this? And even though I was working very closely with our, our vineyard management teams and our grape growing teams, I almost kind of figured it was inevitable, but I was stunned that everything came in really clean. Like, we don't use sulfur on the must at all. That's a very common practice that you add a little bit of the preservative sulfur dioxide to, to clean the fruit of its natural, bacteria and yeast before going into fermentation. And I was kind of expecting to need to do that as like a preventative measure to help protect the fruit, but the fruit was clean. I mean, it was so clean. I just remember every day just kind of standing over the fruit, just being like, it's still looking really good, So that was great. Hats off to the growers on that one, and they just stayed on it. And maybe we had a little bit less moisture, like I was saying, in 2023 versus 2011, but whatever it was good. And the wines are in my opinion much better than 2011 is. So what we get is the benefit of the long growing season, because of course the longer the growing season, the theory is the deeper the flavors and the more development you get in terms of tannin and flavors and maturation. And if you can kind of slow down the sugar ripening in the berries, that all kind of makes for a better wine. And so we definitely pushed that theory to the max this year, and really ended up with some fantastic wines.
I think these wines are beautiful. I mean, talking about aging wine, I think you could drink these now, smell, I mean, especially the Chardonnay, but I think they have a really long runway. Like, I'm super excited to see where these are in 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, like the structure, like even on the nose, you can kind of sense that longevity.
I agree.
Ooh, we have a good question. What does a cooler year mean for age ability? The 2011s end up aging wonderfully. Was that because of a cooler year, wetter year, both?
All right, I'll try to take that. But one thing that cooler years typically are associated with are higher acidity levels, so more acidity because of the cooler, heat basically is the catalyst to convert the acidity into well, let's just say there's a inverse relationship between the acidity and the sugar. As the acidity goes down in the grapes, the sugar level goes up. And so the hotter a season, technically the quicker or the acidity depletes and or the lower the acidity has become. So the cooler vintages, you have more acidity. Now in 2011, there was definitely more acidity, and lower alcohols tend to be the other inverse, or the other result of a cooler vintage. Now, for whatever reason, 2023 didn't necessarily have the same outcomes in terms of acidity and alcohol. But to get back to the question, um, the guess is right. Thank you for the question. The 2011s, to be perfectly honest, when they were released, they were kind of received a little bit, not very warmly. And people didn't think the wines were very good, but they ended up being some of the best
Some of my
aging wines.
favorite wines are from that vintage.
Yeah. So the first 2, 3 years, I guess maybe people didn't think they were that good. And then, when you start to revisit them, 3, 5, 10 years later, they're really, really beautiful. So acidity does help age wine. Tannins tend to help age wine. And I guess, 2020 and 2011, that was, it just worked out that way. So, but that's not to say that wines from warmer years can't age too. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about it, but that's what makes being a wine enthusiast and a consumer fun, right? Because it's pretty mysterious, right? I mean, some people will say, oh, well, wines with higher alcohol don't age well. Have you ever had a Barolo? Like, have you ever had some of these wines that are like, pushing 15.5% alcohol, and they're pretty old, and they're wonderful, right? So it's not always so simple. No. And at the end of the day, it's the experience, and it's the mystery of the whole journey that makes it so exciting.
Well, it's one of the things that I love when we're tasting through is there is all of the science, which is great, and there's the place, the geology, right? There's like all of these different aspects of wine that you can get really technical on, right? Like we can literally measure it. But there's a piece of magic, right? There's a point where it all comes together and you get that the wines that raise the hair on the back of your arms, like those like really magical moments. And I think that's always part of it. And sometimes, I think the 2011, to Julian's point, is a great example. People were really down on that vintage, and it's turned out to be really spectacular. And I think, if you've been lucky enough to go back to Barolo to try a lot of those wines, a lot of those wines require a really long time of aging to kind of reach their peak where they're really pleasurable to drink. So it's always fun to get to.
Yeah,
we're lucky.
That's all
we get to
about.
That's
part of the reason. This is not necessarily, a sales pitch. Maybe it is a little bit, but I used to buy one bottle of things, right?
Yep.
And now it's like somebody one time told me, like, no, you got to do at least 2 or 3, because that way you can have one, see how it's at, see where it's at. You might really like it and say, like, okay, I'm gonna open the other 2 in the next a couple months or whatever. You might say to yourself, I think this needs a little bit more time, and that's kind of a fun personal, objection that you can have and determine for yourself. And then, it's also kind of neat to age one for a long time.
Yeah.
And then, you find it somewhere hidden, in your closet or your wine, fridge or whatever you might have, and you pull it out, and then it's cool.
Yeah.
So it's fun.
Well, I think that's I was given similar advice of like, if you can buy multiple bottles, and then when it's drinking the way that you want it to drink, that's when you should drink it, right? Because you'll talk to some people that are like, I love my Pinot 10 years old, and they really like some of those notes that develop, like, and the fresh fruit kind of falls apart a little bit, and you get more of those cooked notes. And some people like it really fresh and vibrant and young. So a lot of it is your taste. I do see a question about opening the Sonoma Coast and Russian River. If those were the 21s, we do have those in our glasses. So we would be very happy to taste through those with you. And with that, a question between Russian River and Sonoma Coast, should we hop over the 21s, Julien? And
yeah, we can speak certainly generally about the differences, because I see one question that says, what are the biggest differences we should be looking for between Russian River and Sonoma Coast? And I will say that there are some general characteristics that you can kind of count on in terms of the typicity of those two wines. So, Russian River Valley is a very, very well-known appellation, as we probably all likely know. It has an incredible reputation. And in my opinion, it's kind of surpasses the rest of the appellations within the state of California. Personally, it is my personal preference in terms of all of the appellations. I love them all, but I do think that Russian River has this really incredible purity. It's more what makes Russian River so special is the fruit. It's the purity and the precision and just like the fruit that is just so incredibly like almost like you can see it when you're tasting and smelling the wine. And so while it may be more singular in the sense that it's a celebration of fruit purity in its most crystallized sense, it's just stunning, I think. And it's just like I don't know. There's only so many ways I can describe purity, but that's where I find to be Russian River is what makes it special. And then of course on the palate, it tends to be a little bit more like spherical. It tends to be smoother. It has a little bit of more depth, a little bit more richness, and and what I also like to say is it can be, if it's not properly managed, it can be a little bit much, right? Like I've had Russian River wines that are a little bit, a little bit too much of all of that. And what we're trying to do is celebrate all of that, harness it all, package it up super nice and tight, and present it in like just an incredible format. And I think we've done a really, really good job of that the past couple of years, especially. So that's what I get on the Russian River. Sonoma Coast.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick while we're still talking about Russian River.
Yes.
For me, and if you drink a lot of Russian River, it is definitely right. It's known for the fruit. I think with the wine that Julien is making specifically, one of the really beautiful things about it is the retention of the acid. And so this wine for me, and I just tasted it and the finish is still going. So you have that really beautiful balance. So you get this really, the beautiful fruit, that spherical mouthfeel, just this like lusciousness that's just so enjoyable. It's like sinking into a warm bath kind of feeling. But then the acid is there, the finish is there, there's structure. So that balance, like everything is really harmonious. And I think as it ages, this is 21 that's in our glass, so it has a few more years on it. They really start to meld. It's like, for me, wine is a little bit like, a person growing up. So you have those awkward teenage years, usually maybe right after it goes in the bottle where, your feet are too big for your body and you're tripping over yourself, voice is breaking. But you're like, that's going to be a cool person when they grow up. And then a few years later, right, they've kind of come into their own, things are coming together, and then they just continue to develop into this really awesome person. So
absolutely.
Just wanted to give you that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Before we move to Sonoma Coast, because I think they're really beautiful wines.
Yeah, the Russian River just has there's just a feeling about it that's just high touch, high class. It's like when you look at a nice car, you just got that curve. It's just like, man, you can just tell there's a lot that's gone into it.
Yeah.
So Russian River, Sonoma Coast, I would say, it's a really, really big appellation. So there's actually a lot of different versions of Sonoma Coast that you could experience. Our Sonoma Coast wines are made up of, I should say our Sonoma Coast blend is made up of about 40 to 50% of the blend comes from Gaps Crown Vineyard. The reason is because we have a pretty large footprint in the Gaps Crown Vineyard. It's a 120 acre vineyard, and we have about 40 acres of vines within the Gaps Crown Vineyard. And we're getting it from all different parts of the vineyard. And we make a beautiful single vineyard, Gaps Crown. It's our flagship single vineyard wine. And the remainder of the wine that doesn't go into the single vineyard, which is all still very, very good. It's just a matter of how that Gaps Crown blend comes together. that becomes the base, the foundation of our Sonoma Coast blend.
Mm-hmm.
And Gap's Crown is, I would say, it's a special site. It's a little bit unusual, I would say, in terms of Sonoma Coast, because it does have just a really brilliant blue fruit, very playful, very approachable character to it. And that is kind of like the core of the wine. So Russian River being more of like a red and maybe a little bit of a black fruited wine, Sonoma Coast is more blue and black. And of course, there's always a little bit of, red fruit and Pinot Noir, but I would say that generally speaking, if you're looking for a difference between the two, you're going to get more of like the red cherry, pomegranate, cranberry, strawberry character in Russian River. And then in Sonoma Coast, you're going to get blueberry, blackberry, maybe some raspberry, and then some other like darker fruits. So, and when we're talking about California wine too, fruit is always going to be at the forefront of the wine. So even when we might describe the wines as having a touch of like a black tea or herbaceousness or forest floor or like some of the vegetal characters, that's always the stuff that's kind of tucked in behind the fruit, melding with it very nicely, and giving it nuance and giving it some complexity. And so for Sonoma Coast, the rest of our program, the fruit comes from the Sebastopol Hills, for the most part. And the Sebastopol Hills is a interesting, what we call a neighborhood, where it's quite cool, it's windy, it's in a foggy kind of area, and so it's a later ripening part of the appellation, and you get a little bit of the drier fruits as well as some nice undertones of the herbal components. So I find that you get, a little bit more of a nuanced, more of a complex aromatic profile because you're dealing with now multiple different types of aromas, not just a fruity aroma, but other things too.
Yeah, and I would say for those of you who are tasting along with these 221s, I think Julian's descriptors right now are really spot on for these. I've been smelling and tasting while he's been talking. But the Sonoma Coast for me, you really get those soft herbs, fresh herbs from an herb garden. There's a little florality to it. Honestly, it smells a little bit like the weather right now to me. Spring is finally starting to think it might be coming to Sonoma County. So you're seeing, those early flowers, a little bit of early budding, some of those like not vegetal green, but that kind of spring fresh green. So I get a little bit more of that in the Sonoma Coast, and the Russian River for me is just these like layers of fruit. It makes it sound simple, but it's really like you just keep going deeper and deeper with the fruit.
Absolutely.
They're both fantastic. So let's see, it looks like we got more questions coming through. Thank you. So we have what are our favorite wines and why? And also, how long would you suggest aging 4-barrel? We have someone in our audience who has 4-barrel. Thank you for joining us on this webinar and being such a long supporter of Kosta Browne. Do these ages blend similarly? Great. So I would say these two blends age pretty similarly. I think for your own preference, there's definitely you might want one to age a little bit longer based on how you like the fruit profile to show up, but they are so close in area, and we don't. One might be fermented and more concrete, one might be, but the winemaking process is pretty similar for these two wines.
Yeah, and I think, one of the challenges of the Appellation Series from a winemaking standpoint is, we do believe and think that it needs to serve multiple purposes. And the holy grail of winemaking is if you can make a wine that you can drink it early and it being delicious, and you can also age it for, 5, 10, 15 years and it age gracefully and become more interesting and maintain its structure and its, and still be enjoyable. And so, we do know that there's a number of y'all out there who will get your wine and drink it within the first 2 or 3 months. And that's awesome. I mean, that's fantastic. That's what it's meant to be there for. Um, and we want to be obviously, that to be a very, very good and pleasing experience. But we also know that some people like to age it, right? So, and it also, like Paige said, it definitely comes down to personal preference. If you like fruit in the wine, I would say you're looking at upon release to say 3 or 4 years. That's like the purest fruit expression. And then I'd say at like the 3 year mark, maybe the 2 or 3 year mark to the 6 year mark, you're now looking at like the secondary flavors where the fruit's beginning to fade a little bit, and you're starting to get a little bit of that oxidation and some of that aging starting to creep into the taste of the wine. And that's a fun stage too, because it's a transition phase between like the fresh fruit and all the brightness into a little bit more of like, I don't know, like the leather and some of the dried herbs and the dried fruit. And then of course, after like 6, 7 years to 12 years or whatever it might be, that's when you're getting into tertiary, the third set of aromatics compounds that will come from aging wine. And, I think it all comes down to what you like, what you like to do. And, I will say that, we've worked hard and we've thought deeply about some of the small things that we can do from a winemaking perspective to age the wines, to allow the wines to age better, longer.
Yep.
And so some of the things that we've done to kind of try to, without impacting the young wine presentation, while improving the ageability of it, is we'll do a little bit of whole cluster fermentations in most of the wines, not all of them, but a little bit of whole cluster adds a little bit of structure, and it helps the wine, age longer. And sometimes when I drink a wine that maybe is lacking structure, and Pinot Noir, tends to not have as much structure. It's obviously a very light red wine. It can, well, I would say that when I drink a wine that's old that doesn't have any structure, it literally tastes and feels like a I don't know,
Deflated. It
yeah,
just
well,
feels like flat.
I feel like it's like like a house that's been squished, that's just like falling down because it doesn't have the right support to keep the structure upright. Like you can almost feel that. It just kind of like feels like, and so adding, having tannin in the wine with the use of stems is one of the ways that help keep it upright in a way. And then, acidity helps, but our acidity levels are kind of determined based on the vintage. And yeah, so trying to get it to age a little better. And that way the experience can go on for a long time. And I think our wines are, we taste some of our wines that are in the first decade of the 2000s, and some of those wines are aging really, really well still.
Really well. Yep.
And then, the teens, I think are really, really fun. And that's kind of when we started to tinker with the ageability, and we're seeing really, really good results from those wines already. So, but really it comes down to preference. It really, really does.
I really love that kind of 5 year spot, especially for a lot of our wines. We also, if you haven't been to the winery and you want to come, we really focus on not featuring current release at the winery. And one of the reasons is to really showcase the wines at the different points of aging. So like in our Winemaker series, the Observation series, we're pouring all 2019 right now. So those wines have had some real time to sort of settle and start to grow into themselves. There are other offerings we do throughout the year where we'll pour as old as 14, sometimes older. So we have a lot of fun checking in on those vintages, seeing how they age. So our friend with the 4 barrel question, if you want to give us a call, we can see what vintage you're talking about. But a lot of it, to Julian's point, is, what do you like to taste in your wine?
Yeah.
And so I would kind of use that as your guidance, especially since 4 barrel is different every year. We don't have as much of a Sonoma Coast in this vintage.
I will add real quick the 4 barrel. So, the 4 barrel is a lot of fun to make, right? And it is our pinnacle offering, right?
Mhm.
It's the wine that is like the most sought after of all of our Pinots. And so there has to be a little bit of a wow factor to that wine. So, to be honest, it tends to have a little bit more new oak.
Okay.
Sometimes it's been 100%, honestly. Sometimes it's usually 50 or 75% new oak. What that means is, and when I say 75% new oak, uh, my goal as a winemaker has always been, whether it's 30% new oak or 100% new oak, is that it's always integrated and it's a part of the wine, but it's not in the front of the wine, right? So, and a 75% new oak wine can taste and feel less oaky than sometimes a 25% oak wine that's not
Yep.
made well, right?
Mhm.
So 75% oak is a way of finding like the really awesome barrels that have integrated really, really well. New oak tends to add tannin to the wine, so they age a little better. They definitely can, you know, put off like a really kind of glossy, like this really luxurious, like suave kind of feel to the wine. And also since 2016, all of the four barrels have been bottled unfiltered.
Mhm.
And so what that means is, we take the barrels, we rack the wine from barrel to tank, and then we let the wine sit in tank for months at a time sometimes. And we go through a natural settling process to basically allow all the sediment to slowly drift down to the bottom of the tank. And then we remove the wine again and we leave the sediment behind. And we do that multiple times to the point at which the wine is, not crystal clear like a filtered wine, but very, very clear. But there is a little bit of yeast and bacteria that's still in the wine, and that allows for oxygen to be absorbed by the yeast and the bacteria. Now, they're not alive, but it acts as a reservoir to help absorb some of that. So that really slows down the aging too. And it makes it much more complex. Now, it just so happened that I was working on the four barrel blend about 2 months ago. And so I had a couple open. I opened like 19, 20, 21. A, to check on them. B, to kind of get a sense of the style and how they're aging and all these different things. And
And C,
a
because it's fun.
and C, because it's fine. Yeah, of course. You open a
Fun.
bottle,
Yeah.
you get to take it home.
Yeah.
So I kind of crashed a friend's tasting. A friend of mine from college was tasting, and I brought the 19 four barrel.
I don't think I was here that day. I'm
No.
just gonna be a little salty about that. Yeah.
So I was, but which is awesome. But then I come in here and they're drinking all 19s, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be really interesting because here we are, four barrel pinnacle bottle next to a bunch of other 19s. And it's kind of one of those moments where it's like, okay, you know, let's see how good this is, right?
Yeah.
Little, any winemaker will tell you, like, you always kind of get a little nervous in these moments. So anyway, we poured the four barrel at the end,
Yeah.
and it was like everyone was just like, what? This is insane. So it
Mhm.
really stood out as like a incredible wine. So anyway, we shouldn't talk about four barrel too much, but
It's not in this release.
yeah. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. But four barrel is a cool wine. I think you can age it for a long, long time. So
We do have a fun question asking about to describe Santa Lucia and Santa Rita compared to the wines that some of our friends have opened at home. And we
yes.
do have currently Santa Rita in our glass in the Anderson Valley. So another completely different appellation. And for me, tasting these wines side by side, since I am lucky enough to get to do that, it really becomes like a master class in Pinot every day. We, like I said earlier, there's the winemaking, there's a through line in everything. Everything is spontaneous fermentation. Everything is aged in oak. Sometimes there's more new or less new oak, but so you really get to see that sense of place when you're tasting them side by side.
Yeah.
And I think for Santa Rita in particular and Anderson Valley, which are two of the wines that Julien and I had, they are cooler growing regions. That might sound funny because Santa Rita is so much further south, but because of the geography there and the elevation and a lot of other factors, it's actually a really, really cool growing site. And so I think for me, those wines show more of those. I always get like a little bit of lavender and some florality and some, French herbs, like the herbs de Provence. And so they're really, really beautiful food wines. If you're looking to open a special bottle with your friends at dinner, that like pairing wine, Russian River and Sonoma Coast obviously would be great with dinner, but I just drink those. Santa Rita, I think, is that you put it with a meal and all of a sudden everything is elevated. The wine is elevated, the food is elevated. Like now I want to go home and roast a chicken and, get some new potatoes and
cooking dinner tonight.
Apparently, I don't know. Let's, we do have this beautiful kitchen behind. That's we should just.
Yeah, I would agree. Santa Rita is the coolest climate that we work within, but it's also the longest growing season. So it's kind of interesting. You get two different forces working on the wine and the grapes. One being the cool climate, so slower ripening, but you have a longer growing season, so you're getting a lot of development. And so, you tend to have a little bit more acidity. So you can feel that acidity just a touch more. It's a little bit of a brighter texture. Not as deep, not as concentrated in fruit, I would say, as Russian River or Sonoma Coast, but very long and like tons of flavor and like a really, really nice balance between the two. And it's not a light wine. It's a lighter wine. It is probably the lightest of the series, but it's still beautiful California Pinot Noir. And then San Lucia Highlands, that is, a wine that has, I would describe it as a little bit more concentrated in flavor, more of like a deeper wine. And I always get a really neat two characters I get out of San Lucia are a lot of citrus, like orange blossom, orange rind, kind of on the nose. Like when you're peeling back an orange, you get that zest, and so that's something that comes forward for me. And then there's like the chaparral, like the bush of a kind of like a foothills, like a little bit of a drier climate. And
There's
so
almost like a little dustiness.
yeah, there's like a little,
Yeah.
it's like a little bit of a, I was in a tasting one time and Master Som described the wine as twiggy. I was like, I love that, twiggy. So I mean, it's got like a little bit of like I don't know, it's just like a dried straw, like something dried that's woody,
Yeah.
in the smell. And it's not from oak, it's just from the region.
Well, we do have a really specific question from Cindy. So she has been finding a bit more fruit in the Sonoma Coast than the Russian River for 21 and 22. So she's wondering if we would say the 23 follows along, but the Sonoma Coast, the Sonoma is more fruit forward than the Russian River. Well, I don't know if I find what.
I would say, to be honest, 23 is a year that I find that the Sonoma Coast actually have a little bit more depth than the Russian River. And usually the Russian River is kind of like this really beautiful, the shape of it is really beautiful, and then the Sonoma Coast is more like a saucer, like a UFO, type of shape. And whereas the Russian River is more like a bowling ball that just glides down into the strike every time type of thing. But anyway, the Sonoma Coast, again, the Sonoma Coast and all these wines, really, 80% of the experience on any of these wines is going to be a fruit element, right? So, and Sonoma Coast has plenty of it, especially because a lot of it comes from Gaps Crown. Gaps Crown is like, it's just it's a really profound, just effusive expression of fruit. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and to be honest, we all experience things differently, right? Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about that we all have different senses and one person. I mean, there's talk about why do we drink wine? I
Mhm.
mean, you could get into like, you know, discussions and or arguments. I mean, when we taste wine together, the amount of different um, descriptions that come out
Mhm.
are it's fascinating,
Yeah.
and the way that we write our tasting notes, I think is really fun. The production team, we all get together, we all taste the same wine at the same time, and we all write our notes down. And I challenge the team to, well, I asked the assistant winemaker to take everyone's tasting notes and to find the common descriptions that are
Mhm.
in everyone's, like the most common 4 or 5 things that people are saying, and to like synthesize that together in their tasting note, because um that means that more people are experiencing the same
Yeah.
thing, as opposed to somebody saying, oh, I find it to be like a little bit like this, and everyone else is like, what? No, I don't get that at all,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it's fun. It's part of the fun.
Well, and there are super tasters and all of those things. I mean, I did think the Sonoma Coast, when we did our team tasting of the 23s, for whatever reason, really stood out to me this year.
Yeah,
I think that wine they're all stunning. That one was particularly a standout in that tasting for me. But I would say that's the other really interesting thing when you're tasting through the wines like that, and then you go back and revisit them and you find something different, or a different wine on a different day really stands out. And we have a question about whether we'll do this again with future releases. I don't know. I'm having
sure, let's do
fun.
it.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks, Ron. And then we also have some questions about Willamette and our thoughts about Treehouse and Bootlegger. So
Okay.
we're veering off Appellation, but
Yeah,
Treehouse and Bootlegger do go into the Russian River,
sure
which
do.
is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Treehouse is, I don't know, I can't.
Julian loves
I
Treehouse.
love Treehouse. There's not a treehouse on the property yet, but Gas or Treehouse Vineyard is like a you know the top of a knoll on a ridge line, but there is an outcrop of redwoods that's coming right up the top of it, and then surrounded by vineyards. And it's a small 8-10 acre lot, so it's not big, but really beautiful. And those wines are incredible. And to be honest, Treehouse is in Russian River. Russian River is in Sonoma Coast. So on any given year, Treehouse typically and almost always flows into Russian River in terms of the excess Treehouse that doesn't go into the single vineyard blend. It goes into the Russian River blend because that's like the natural flow. But we put a little Treehouse in Sonoma Coast. Like we spread it out because it's so good, and
So
it's
good.
like
Yeah.
it's the wine that when people are visiting, whether they're just regular guests, new to the brand, new to Pinot Noir, all the way up to people who are like experienced tasters from, whether they're have certifications or they're from abroad or whatever, you give them some Treehouse and it's like the head turner, like, what is this? This
Mhm.
is something special. So that's Treehouse. Incredible, kind of like you know, very athletic, like it's a very, like wine, like I've described it as like Michael Phelps before.
Mhm.
Just
He uses that
towering.
descriptor a lot, just so you guys
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Mhm.
It's being recorded, so I'm like, but anyway, like a towering figure, just so incredibly just uh fit, and yet glides through the
Mhm.
water and just crushes everybody. So that's kind of like Treehouse. Um,
I love that descriptor.
yeah, so really fun. And then Bootleggers is another great estate wine that we make, and that wine is in Russian River as well, and it has like a broader texture, a broader palate. I would call it like it has one thing I find to be really that has a very distinct signature smell
Mhm.
that is like almost easy. It's very easy to identify bootleggers because it's got this really beautiful like bouquet of raspberry, blackberry fruit, but then it has this touch of sage or like some sort of a herb that is like it's there, like it's maybe it's really pronounced. We don't use a lot of whole cluster on the wine. It's just a part of the fruit. I can't describe it other than it's got that really interesting dynamic between the two. And then it's got this really beautiful palate too. So Bootleggers is great.
And then we do also make a Chardonnay at Bootleggers, just a plug for the Chardonnay lovers out there. The Bootlegger Chardonnay is always hands down one of my favorite wines.
Yeah.
And that wine, when you want to talk about ageability, we opened a 2017 Bootlegger Chardonnay that was, I mean, lights out, still like beautiful fruit, this elegance, it's got gorgeous acid, and it just like goes for days. I could drink that wine for breakfast and throughout the day. But I do think there are two really, if you're, a lot of our audience seems very familiar with the brand, but Treehouse and Bootleggers are one of our estate vineyards, and we do source most of our fruit from grower partners. It's not vineyards that we ourselves own, so they are really special places that we're excited. And it's also really special that we include them in the Appellation blends. I think if you read the list of vineyards that goes into all of these wines from all of these regions, it's a who's who of vineyards. Every single one of them, you will find a single vineyard production of from a producer somewhere. And so it's really incredible to get to work with such high quality fruit and such amazing growing partners. And we have a good life here at Kosta Browne. We're very lucky. We work hard, but we don't have a lot of excuses. So we do work hard, but we do have a lot of fun. And it looks like
I'll get into the Willamette. So Willamette, it's a wine that we're also offering in the release, and we're on our 23 would have been our third vintage in Willamette Valley, and really awesome, incredible, fun part of the offering. And you know, because to Paige's point a little bit earlier, I think it's so neat to be able to taste these wines, experience them all through the lens of a single producer. Because, you know, prior to, for example, going into Oregon or going into some of these other regions, we did our homework, right? We did our tastings where you buy a bunch of bottles and you're trying to, like, you know, you mix in the Santa Rita with the Russian River, and that's, you know, you try to like identify its profile. But it's really hard, you know, when you're mixing in the unclarity of the producer's touch on the wine, it really makes it difficult to pinpoint the differences. And yes, you know, we can generically, you know, say that certain wines can be like this, that, and the other, but, you know, depending on how the winemaker treats the fruit, I mean, a lot can change. So Willamette is a, you know, I would say, I'll start by saying actually Anderson Valley is more like Willamette Valley than the rest of the California appellations. So Santa Rita, San Lucia, Russian River, and Sonoma Coast are more similar to one another than Anderson Valley and Willamette Valley. Those two are like, you know, kind of paired with each other in terms of the profile, because mainly because of the structure. Like there's just much more tannin on both of those wines, and yeah, that's what kind of sets them apart. So, and to the question that we got was like, you know, talk about how different it is. I mean, it's amazing when you're going from blending, you know, Gary's Vineyard. I remember this specifically. We were wrapping up Gary's Vineyard, which is just such a playful, super enjoyable wine. It's like the life of a party type of thing. And then we went to Shea, and it was the first time that we had been into a blending section with Shea. I mean, yes, we had tasted the barrels, and you know, we had been tracking the wines, but when you taste in succession, you tend to notice things, you know, that you might otherwise have just experienced but never maybe focused on. Anyway, we put the shader to the glass to our nose and tasted it, and it was like it was a world's difference. It was so, it was like shocking, you know, because, you know, it's not you know, it's just different. Oregon doesn't produce wines that have quite the level of fruit that the California wines do.
Well, it's not as sunny, right? I
not-
mean, there's some really like it rains
Yeah.
more. It's not
Yep.
as sunny. It's not as warm.
It can be pretty
Yeah.
warm during the summer. It gets pretty hot, but it's definitely a later season, and it rains a whole hell of a lot more
Mhm.
during the winter and the summer because they don't irrigate as much over there because it rains frequently enough to supply the vines with the water they need. But the Shea is an interesting site. Really cool wines. I've loved the wines that we've produced, but they're definitely much earthier and they have a lot more tannin, and they don't have quite as much of the richness that the California wines do. And that's not, to each their own type of thing, right? And that's what makes Pinot so fun, and that's what we're trying to bring to the table is a different expression for people who like to either they have preferences between Oregon and California, or people who are super curious,
Yep.
right, about what the difference is between the two. And so Shea is an awesome wine. It's a wine that I would say is one of those wines it's better to age longer because of what we were talking about. When you have a little bit more tannin in the wine, sometimes another year or two helps that tannin break down and form longer chains because tannin basically looks like a hand. And when you have a bunch of them in the wine, they're floating around, and when they hit your palate, it can dry off your palate. But in time, they slowly kind of start to link together and they form super long chains, and you have less points of which it would, interact with your palate in a way in which it would dry it. So, and instead you get like a really different sensation that's really amazing. So
Well, and I
Shea,
did just check in on the 15 Sonoma Coast, and speaking of that like sensation, there's a like a velvety quality to it that like you can really sense exactly what Julien just said. It really stood out to me tasting it right now, but just that talking about ageability, which has come up a bunch, but I think you really sense that it's not just like a flavor profile, it's also a textural.
yeah. Oh yeah, it's
thing.
totally a texture thing. It just
Yeah.
the velvet is perfect. It feels very, very different. And yeah, and so the Willamette Valley wine, it is, it's a wine that is, if you had the Anderson Valley, I would honestly say you could begin to see what it would taste like if you know the Anderson Valley well. But it's a little bit more, a little bit less, I would say even a little bit less fruity because the Anderson Valley can still provide quite a good, punch of fruit. A little bit more herbal, and a little bit more dried fruit. And the 2023 is a really, really good wine. I thought each of the vintages have been radically different in terms of the growing season, and they've all kind of produced, I'd say relatively unique wines from one another. But I love the 23 because it was actually a little bit of a warmer year for them. And there was a storm that kind of ended the season a little bit early, but everything got nice and ripe. And you have all that tannin, but you've got a really nice, full body on that too. And I love the 23 Willamette Valley.
Yeah, it's
really,
beautiful.
truly
It's
remarkable.
really beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there was a comment asking about our favorites, and I would say that really changes for me, which is not a helpful answer, I realize. But speaking of personal preference, I think there is, I like to think of wine as having personalities, and there are those moments, right? You have the friend that's like really boisterous and loves to party and go out, and sometimes you want to do that, and sometimes you want to like kick back and have a quiet night at home. And so I think that wine is reflective of that too. And so like the mood that you are in, I know people will say what you're eating, but I also think I had a winemaker once tell me that sometimes wine takes a nap while it's aging. If you check in on some wine and it doesn't feel flawed, but it doesn't feel as vibrant and it's not old enough to really have lost it, he's like, just give it a year. He's like, it's just taking a little rest. And so, I think that, wine goes through those periods of change as well. And so I think a lot of it is, tasting and trying and figuring out what you like. And here again, if you want to give us a call and say, like, this is the wine I really like, Paige, or one of our other, great professionals here, we can kind of try and help guide you. So if it's something that you're like, I really, really love the wines from Santa Lucia, we can help steer you towards other wines you might really love. Or you really love Chardonnay, but you like Chardonnay that's richer or more acid driven, we can guide you in that as well. So I really do, we love hearing from our members. We love seeing them here on site, and we love seeing you out in the world. And we will be, I think we're reaching an hour. I didn't realize it's gone that fast. So if you'll be at Pebble Beach this year, we will be there. We'll be pouring at Healdsburg Wine and Food this year as well. And we'll keep letting you know when we're out in the world outside of Sebastopol. But keep trying, call us, let us know what you're loving. Same thing with vintage. If I saw a few comments on there of people who've just opened their 15s and 16s and you're loving that helps us give you recommendations as well. So we're really happy to help answer those questions and guide you. And if you're coming to the winery and you let us know in advance, we have kind of our set tastings, but we always love to hear your feedback and if there's something we can include, and have that conversation with you as well. And I think, in our last few minutes, we do have a question about Burgundy that I think is worth answering of how we make it. I know Burgundy release won't be till the fall, so everybody right now, buy your appellation wines. But well, I think with the suggestions to do this every release, you'll probably be hearing from us then. But we do make the wine in France, and I will let Julien take it from there because he has been involved in making a very complicated dream come true. Huge shout out to our legal team, if anybody's on the call right now, for helping us get through that. But
yeah, a lot of work, a lot of interesting, logistics that go into it. But yes, the wine is made in Burgundy. It has to be in order for it to be labeled as such. And we have great partners out there that we've been so incredibly fortunate to be, paired up with in a sense, that we had a chance to meet and that take winemaking very, very seriously. And together we make the wine. So I have more or less an extension of Kosta Browne that work there. I do visit multiple times a year. I go there sometimes 2 or 3 times to do everything from oversee the production, to taste the wines, and to do the blending. And then once everything is finalized at the end of the year, we send the wines to California in bulk. So basically before they're bottled, and then we bottle them at Kosta Browne. And it's really, truly an amazing, amazing extension of what we can do. And they're unique, they're special, they're truly on par, if not better than a lot of the competitors. I mean, we've done our comp sets and we've been so pleased with the results. And it's because that we have a dedicated partnership out there, and the wines are really quite fun and very different from one another, and totally different from the pinots that we're producing here. Yes, there's a similarity between the two, but it's a completely different climate, a whole different system and clones and all sorts of different things. So a lot of fun.
We'll talk about it more when we do that. There's one last question that I think is pertinent. If I'm in the Barlow, can I stop in and say hi? Give us a call first. So we are a working winery. So we have to keep our gates locked and closed for safety. We have forklifts moving. We have, we're bottling, all sorts of stuff happening that we would hate for anyone to wander in and get hurt. On the flip side of that, it's really, really cool to come and visit us here because there is always something happening in the cellar. So harvest is obviously a really, really exciting time to come and visit because you get to see us processing the fruit, working the fruit. We take you up. If you want to see what happens in a tank, you get to see that. But when we're bottling, you can come and see the bottling line. When the Burgundy arrives, sometimes that arrives while we have other wine in tank. And so, maybe Julien's doing tank samples. We don't plan this honestly, but if you're walking through the cellar and production's doing something fun, they'll usually ask, you want to try this with us. So you get to do a tank sample of something from California and something from Burgundy, pretty
Yeah.
close to each other.
That's cool.
And so it's really exciting to just have those like organic moments. But we do, appointments are best. But if you know you're coming, give us a call. And if we can get you in for an appointment or even for a quick walk around, we'll absolutely do our best to do. But if you do just show up, it's a really like, we don't know if we'll be able to make it happen because sometimes we just don't have somebody that can walk you around. But if we do, we love to see people here. We love to meet our members. And this question has come up more than once, the clonal similarities. The answer is yes, because those vineyards, some of them overlap in Sonoma Coast and Russian River. And I think we see a lot of the same clones throughout.
Yeah, there's a handful, maybe like I don't know, 7 or 8 clones that are very, very popular. 777, 667, 115, 828, Pomard, Swan, Calera, and 23. I mean, those are off the top of my head.
In both wines.
Yeah, and in almost all of them. And some have more than others in terms of, the 667, 777, 828, those are the Dijon clones, and then the Swan, the Calera, those are the heritage clones. And anyway, there's definitely most vineyards have been kind of, diversified similarly, not exactly, of course, but you're gonna kind of get a lot of the same players and then a couple unique ones here and there.
Yeah.
So, but
very cool. So I think we are right around 3 o'clock. So thank you. The best hour of your week, anonymous person. Thank you. We have a lot of fun doing this. So love seeing all the really great feedback. And like I said, we really do love hearing from you.
Yeah,
so shoot us an email, give us a call. We're happy to answer questions. We love to see what you're drinking and enjoying. And we'll definitely keep you posted about the different things we're doing out in the world, because we are trying to get to you as well as you coming to us. So we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for all your support. Really great set of wines that we have, and we're very pleased. And we take a great deal of responsibility to make nothing but the finest for all of you. So
and 23 is a really phenomenal vintage. So if you're interested in purchasing and you haven't yet, definitely take a look at your allocation, and there's some really special wines in there.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Till next time. Maybe now we'll do this again.
Yeah, I think this is becoming regular programming. So
all right. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a good weekend.